She was born with an empire in her name. She died with $3,500 in her pocket. How does a fortune like that vanish? How does a billion-dollar inheritance end in a single-digit bank balance? Answering that is the story. It's a portrait of wealth that became a wedge. It's about parties, marriages, ledgers, and predators. It's about the strange loneliness that lives inside inherited money. Imagine a girl arriving at society in a storm of silk and diamonds. Imagine one night in the depths of the Great Depression when she and her circle spent $1 million on a single ball. Imagine the headline writers slamming down facts as if they were verdicts. The public outrage was sharp enough to cut through marble. Yet the outrage was only a shallow echo of a more private crisis. She was surrounded by people who wanted the things that came with her, and few who understood the rules of keeping what she'd been given. She inherited $42 million from the Woolworth five and dime empire, a fortune so vast it has been translated to roughly $1 billion in today's dollars. That is the opening fact. That's the gravitational pull. But gravity works both ways. It binds and it crushes. After the first dizzying years came a series of choices and forces that, taken together, explain the collapse. There were extravagant expenditures. There were 7 marriages. There were advisors and lawyers and trustees with their own interests. There were taxes, fees, and the subtle erosion you do not feel until the balance is gone. And somewhere in all of that lived a kind of fiduciary loneliness. A trust desert where friends were often negotiators. Lovers were often claimants, and professionals sometimes looked more like predators than protectors. Let's walk it through slowly. She came of age not as a private person, but as a public spectacle. The debutante ball, $1 million poured into music, gowns, flowers, and fireworks, came at the worst possible time for optics. People who were losing homes and farms watched newsreels of champagne fountains and orchestras. Newspapers wrote about it not only as extravagance, but as moral indictment. That night became a symbol of privilege, of disconnection, and of how visible wealth can become the fuel for public fury. Private fury, though, can be even more destructive. Luxury creates a market. When someone sits on that much money, they don't simply spend it. A whole industry of access grows around them. Chefs, chauffeurs, chauffeurs' wives, jewelers, interior decorators, landlords, social secretaries. Every service that imports proximity to the rich suddenly depends on them. Add to that a lineup of potential spouses whose motives are mixed, and you have a social ecology where loyalty is negotiable. She married 7 times. Each marriage arrived with a new household, new tastes, new legal papers, and often new legal bills. Marriage settles more than affection. It transfers cash flows, control of property, and sometimes the right to future incomes. When a fortune is concentrated in a single person, each marital contract becomes a potential vector for wealth transfer. Prenuptial agreements can protect assets, but they must be negotiated, enforced, and trusted. In their absence, settlements and alimony drain capital quickly. 7 marriages are not just 7 romantic failures. They are 7 times the legal system shuffled lines on the balance sheet. They are 7 cycles of trust being redefined. They are repeated opportunities for fortune hunters to convert affection into currency. And then there are the professionals, trustees, bankers, lawyers, managers, and advisors. In a properly functioning fiduciary relationship, these professionals act as fiduciaries, legally bound to put the client's best interests above their own. But when an heir is socially isolated, inexperienced with money, or emotionally vulnerable, the duty to protect weakens. Fees rise. Transactions become opaque. Investments, once prudently managed, shift toward pieces that promise glamour or immediate access. Yachts, villas, couture, jewels. Liquidity dries up. Meanwhile, the cost of maintaining an empire, staff, insurance, repairs, taxes, mounts like compound interest on debt. This is the forensic economics of decline, not a single grand theft, but an accumulation of legitimate expenses, suboptimal decisions, and exploitative counsel. You can model it. Take a fortune of 42 million. Spend $1 million on a single night. Pay high annual maintenance on multiple homes. Fund decades of extravagant travel and couture. Pay advisors 1 to 2% of assets every year. Settle divorces and pay alimony. The numbers compound. Within a generation, the apparent invincibility of wealth becomes fragile. Consider the arithmetic as a narrative device. 42 million is a vast number. It is also a finite set of dollars that require stewardship. Losing 99.9% of it is not just the result of wild parties. It is the result of institutional failures, repeated legal transfers, and strategic targeting by those who stood closest. She didn't just spend money, she placed trust where it could be cashed out. The trust desert means more than loneliness. It is a region where duty dries up and opportunism grows. When a person feels emotionally dependent on companions, those companions can propose solutions that benefit themselves. Lavish gifts, loans that become defaults, or marriages that tilt the legal scales. Advisors who live by commissions can steer the client toward assets that pay them more, not what the client needs. Trustees can interpret documents in ways that favor their billing practices. Over time, these small advantages compound into catastrophic loss. But the story is not all balance sheets. There are scenes that linger. The ballroom with its chandeliers and $1 million ceiling. The hush when the band stops and a headline writer imagines destitution elsewhere. The wedding vows exchanged amid legal counsel in the wings. The empty rooms in later years where estates are closed and staff have gone. Those details animate the numbers. There are also moments in the ledger that read like courtroom drama. Payments to former spouses, transfers to trusts in tax havens, luxury purchases that read as investments but are actually consumption. In many wealthy estates, art and jewelry are liquidated when cash is needed, but selling takes time, market timing is poor, and sales often realize less than book value. Estate taxes and capital gains taxes bite. Maintenance costs on multiple mansions bleed cash. If investments are concentrated in hard-to-sell assets, a forced liquidation crystallizes losses. Each of these is a legal, ordinary event. None of them needs crime to strip a fortune away. Meanwhile, she was a human being with needs: affection, status, understanding. Those needs created vulnerabilities. Fortune hunters read body language and bank statements. They promised love, companionship, partnership. They negotiated, drafted clauses, and sometimes litigated. They proposed renovations and projects that overnight created new lines in the expense ledger. It's not a melodrama so much as a market response. Where money flows freely, claims arise. Let me pause here. If you're finding this compelling and you want to hear the final chapters of this unraveling through primary documents and ledger reconstructions, hit subscribe. There are deeper records that reveal how, year by year, line items accumulated like sand in an hourglass. Back to the sequence. After the ball and the marriages, and after a lifetime of splendor, there was a slow dawning. She had very little liquid capital left. By the time of her death, she had $3,500. In percentage terms, that is less than 1/100th of 1% of the original bequest. When you look at the numbers, it reads like a collapse. When you look at the life, it reads more like a series of small compromises and erosions. There are specific economic mechanisms to highlight because they are repeatable patterns in failed dynasties. First, compounding consumption. A lifestyle escalates. What begins as a modest staff becomes an army. New homes demand renovation. Yachts sit idle but require upkeep. The cost of maintaining multiple glamorous lives compounds, and consumption begins to eat the principal. Second, the cost of advice. Wealth management fees, trustees' fees, legal bills, these are often calculated as percentages of assets. On a large principal, those percentages mean million-dollar fees every year. When assets shrink, the absolute dollar amounts may still be large relative to available cash. Advisors can either raise prices or recommend liquidation. Both choices deplete capital. Third, Legal transfers through marriage and divorce. A single divorce, particularly in the absence of solid prenuptial protections, can remove a significant portion of a fortune. Multiply that by several marriages, and the legal churn becomes devastating. Each settlement tends to be negotiated in public and requires immediate payouts. Liquid assets are often the first to go. Fourth, market timing and illiquidity. Rich families often own unique assets: estates, private companies, art, jewels. Those are valuable, but not immediately saleable at full price. When cash is needed, forced sales realize discounts. Debt secured by these assets can trigger foreclosure or distressed sales. That turns nominal wealth into thin air. Fifth, psychological spending. Wealth can be a balm for loneliness. Gifts, parties, and vacations can be attempts to buy connection. Those expenditures have intangible returns and very real costs. The emotional economy of an heiress who seeks to fill an absence with consumption is one that professional predators easily exploit. They know the market. They tailor appeals to vanity, to desire, to need. We should also address the public angle. The $1 million ball during the Great Depression was an accelerant of scrutiny. Once public opinion turns judgmental, relationships change. People who once courted a fortune do so more cautiously. Institutions, banks, charities, and social clubs may withdraw discreetly. That social isolation deepens fiduciary loneliness and heightens vulnerability. In such a state, even well-intentioned advisors can misjudge risks or press for hasty decisions to maintain appearances. There is a lesson here that is not moralizing, but forensic. The absence of robust governance and the presence of intense social pressure make a person with great growable wealth extremely exposed. Effective wealth protection is not just about investing in blue-chip stocks. It is about creating structures, independent trustees, transparent reporting, clear conflict of interest rules, enforced prenuptial agreements, and a network of counsel that is accountable to the principal. When those structures fail or are never put in place, capital leaks become inevitable. As we move toward the closing chapters, notice how the emotional tone shifts. Early on, the energy is bright: parties, laughter, the glitter of apparel. Midway, the energy becomes transactional: contracts, settlements, legal advice. In the last third, there is a quietness: empty rooms, sold jewelry, a bank account with $3,500. The increasing intensity is not built on new facts, but on the slow revelation that all this once measured abundance has been whittled down. The crescendo is not loud, it's a tightening realization. This story ends with a small number in a bank ledger, but the final image is larger: a cautionary tableau about trust and money. She could have had every safeguard. She could have had a small circle of fiduciaries who served her interests alone. She could have been coached in the language of money from youth. But those interventions require early action, patience, and, crucially, the kind of honest counsel that resists spectacle. There is one more layer: how the public remembers. For decades, the headlines remembered a $1 million ball and 7 failed marriages. The ledger numbers became shorthand for folly. But forensic economics shows how simple narratives obscure systemic failure. It's easier to say someone spent their inheritance than to track the dozens of legal transfers, fees, and predatory contracts that turned principal into routine bills. The tragedy is not only of money lost, but of a person left impoverished in company, physically surrounded but financially unsupported. As you listen to this, think about what it means to protect others who inherit wealth. What systems can communities build to avoid creating trust deserts? How can families institute governance structures that survive the swirl of emotions and won't evaporate when a new suitor or advisor arrives with a convincing story? Those questions are not merely financial. They are moral and practical roadmaps. If you've stayed with this story and want to explore more cases where ledgers reveal lives, subscribe for the next episode. We'll unpack trust agreements, review sample prenuptial clauses that actually work, and reconstruct forensic timelines that explain how fortunes disappear so often when safeguards are absent. In the end, the narrative returns to the human cost. A woman who could have been comfortable for generations instead died with $3,500. It's a number that should shock us because it reveals the fragility of legal and financial systems in the face of human need. It reveals how wealth without stewardship is not protection. It is a magnet. It draws advisors, claimants, lovers, and opportunists. It attracts attention, and attention is expensive. We started with a paradox. Born into an empire, left with pocket change. The arc of that life teaches something critical. Money, without accountable guardianship and with the corrosive effects of isolation, will not save anyone from being taken advantage of. The ointment of society's admiration cannot replace the clean, dull work of governance, of contracts, audits, and principled counsel. So when the next headline splashes across the paper about a lavish party or a family feud over an estate, look beyond the sensational and ask the economic questions. Follow the fees. Read the settlements. Notice who benefits when a trust is opened and who benefits when it's closed. Her story is a mirror not only of personal loss, but of institutional failure. It asks us to imagine what wealth could be if it were paired with accountability instead of spectacle. It asks us to build systems where inherited fortunes are not lonely, where trustees are guardians, not merchants, and where the young who inherit vast sums are taught not only how to spend, but how to protect the future of those sums for themselves and for others. If this episode moved you, consider sharing it quietly with someone who cares about money, law, or family governance. And when you're ready, return for the next episode where we pull a fortune apart ledger by ledger and listen to what the numbers tell us about people. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the calm, careful reconstruction here, subscribe for more deep dives into fortunes that failed and the systems that might have saved them.